Jacob Jaffa is a journalist with The Sun who's been covering this story. Jacob, afternoon to you. I mean, this story, that there are at the moment very few positives, and we're not really getting any sort of encouraging news being released from those who are at the cutting edge, if you like, of this story right now.
No, unfortunately, you're absolutely right. It seems that pretty much all the experts in this field of deep depth underwater rescue are saying that there's very slim chances, especially now that so much time has passed, of a positive outcome here.
What are we told are the options to those attempting or considering or trying to put together some kind of plan to rescue this vessel?
The options are quite limited, really. It's very difficult to rescue a vessel from such a depth. It's around 12,000 feet if they have reached the wreckage of the Titanic, which is what they were going to visit. And so far, it's mainly consisted of military aircraft from the US and Canada flying over, dropping sonar devices and listening and waiting, trying to hear if there are any communications or sounds made by the vessel, by anyone in it. There's even quite, chilling reports that they could be listening for people thumping on the side of the vessel, but we've heard nothing so far.
We were speaking to your colleague, your colleague Jerome, a little earlier in the Defence Department there at The Sun, and he was saying, and we were discussing the point that even if you were to locate it, that's almost where the story begins in some respects, because locating it is one thing, being able to rescue it is quite something else.
Absolutely. It's not a case where you can just send a similar vehicle down and just pick it up. Yeah. It's an extremely complex operation. There's lots of preparation that usually has to go into these things, even in quite an urgent response situation. And so even when you get it to the surface, you have to then get it open, make sure everyone's inside. They are bolted in. So even if the pressured seal has not failed, there's still limited time, especially near the end of that air supply window, to get them out before the worst happens, really.
And it's only, sadly, when you see a story and a tragedy such as this, Jacob, you start to wonder, and I can't be the only person, why there aren't other mechanisms. I have no idea what they would be, but why there isn't something in place that could address this possibility, or is that just built into the risk factor, if you like, of taking part in these kind of, dangerous activities?
I think there's an element of both there. As Jerome said on the programme earlier, most military submarines do not operate at this depth. Yep. It's an extremely low wreck. It's, as I say, 12,000 feet below the sea level. That's not the sort of area where you'd be kind of cruising around for a long period. The journey time on this submarine was meant to be about 10 hours, and that's to sink, to get down, to do a brief exploration, and then to come back up via a submersible platform. It doesn't even kind of sink itself. It's placed on a platform, which is then rolled onto the surface. That sinks to a depth where the submersible vessel can take off from it and then bring itself down a fairly shorter distance to the wreck and then come back up. So it's not the sort of place where a vessel is designed to withstand long periods there.
Yeah, and not to dwell too much on the obvious specifics of the trauma, but those on board are not naive people. They are people that take part in sort of adventurous activities. They are familiar with how this whole story works. They didn't just pay a load of money and jump on it. They will sadly be painfully aware of everything we're probably talking about now.
Absolutely. Three of them at least are very experienced in this area. You have Hamish Harding, who's a fairly well-known aviator. He's got 3 Guinness World Records, in 2 of which come in submersible vessels. He's been to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. You have Paul-Henri Nargile, who's a very experienced submersible pilot, and then Stockton Rush, who is the CEO of the company OceanGate, which is running this whole operation. And he's also been involved in aviation for most of his life. So, yeah, they will be aware of what's going on if the worst hasn't, unfortunately, already happened.
And that is from what I understand, Jacob, a strong possibility that this thing might have already just broken up in some respects.
Absolutely. We have no idea what's gone wrong with it. We don't know if it's just a loss of steering. There's been some suggestion that it could have been tangled in the wreck, but that's speculative. And it could have been, in the worst case scenario, just a failure of the pressure system, where the whole thing basically stopped keeping the air in and the water out, and that would have been catastrophic.
Yeah, of course. And this, from what I can understand, and this is just a sort of a lay perspective, looking at some of the imagery and reading a little bit, Jacob, about the story, this vessel is, I mean, clearly there are complexities to building something like this. That is amazing that, you know, humankind has managed to develop and innovate in a way that can construct one of these things. But it's also quite frighteningly basic as well in many respects. This is, you know, essentially a remote control situation bolted into, as you say, an airtight capsule, and down you go.
Yeah, that's very true. It is quite a basic craft. It did take quite a long time in development. I believe the company involved only launched their first model of this vessel earlier this year. But as you say, it is quite basic. It's controlled, it's steered by a video game controller or something similar to that, a kind of reinforced version of that. They're bolted into this 22-foot metal capsule, which doesn't have the same sort of capabilities that a stereotypical military submarine might have, where it can go up and down pretty much at will.
People have gone down before, haven't they, in other sort of capsules? I seem to remember that James Cameron, the guy that directed Titanic, also took a trip in some small pod of some sort a few years ago. So there have been previous explorations down there. Has this company had success before, or is this the first of its kind?
I believe that the company has launched some prototype missions down there and that they were fine. But as far as I'm aware, Hamish Harding, one of the passengers, said on social media before going down that he expected this to be, because of the nature of the weather conditions and how small the window of opportunity was, he expected this to be the only manned craft going down there this year. So I don't believe that this specific model of craft has had a manned journey down there before.
And this would have been the most spectacular of experiences, albeit something most people would never embark on. But the whole idea is that this would have been a very up close and personal floating around the wreckage of the Titanic, a clearly expensive journey for those that were on board. They appear to all be people of a certain wealth level that were able to pay to be part of it. But all the directions at the moment are pointing to the fact that we will never hear those stories, because it's becoming increasingly likely that this vessel simply hasn't survived whatever's happened to it.
Tragically, that's the case. All the experts in the field are saying the chances are slim to none, 1% chances. And similar events like this have happened before. Submersibles have been lost. These have been at slightly differing depths, but in those cases, even at sort of similar depths, it's not hopeful.
I was making the point to Jerome as well earlier that often when there is some kind of tragedy or people are trapped somewhere, lots of sort of armchair ideas, people come out and say, why don't you try this method, or there must be another way, or surely this could be worth giving it a go. I mean, with this, it's very different, because we are talking about trying to circumnavigate the laws of physics, basically. It can't be done.
Absolutely. I believe when you were talking to Jerome, you referenced the people being trapped in a cave a few years ago. And, cave diving is a relatively popular hobby, and it's not something which involves those forces of pressure and just the weight of the world literally on the water. In this case, you can't there aren't really hobbyists who do this. There are not people who go down anywhere near this depth for a hobby, usually. And you just can't circumnavigate those things and say, well, let's just pop a recovery vehicle down, try and find it, if you can find it at all within the vastness of the ocean, and then try and lift it up, because it is far more complicated than that.
Listen, we will, sadly, I'm sure, speak again on this. Jacob, thank you. Jacob Jaffa, who's the senior journalist at The Sun, who's been reporting on this story.